Hey everyone, welcome to Insert Game here. My name is Brian.
And I'm Madison.
And I'm Jared.
A couple weeks, not just a couple weeks ago, like a little longer than that. A little indie game called Elden Ring hit the scene. You may not have heard of it. I don't know. It's kind of like not very well known or something. It's kind of small.
It's got a cult following of the entire world.
Yeah. So, but I mean, in all seriousness, Elden Ring has been a massive, massive success all across the world. It has become the most successful game that FromSoft has ever released so far as we've seen. It has taken the world by storm. It is like the sales numbers, like I don't have the sales numbers pulled up in front of me right now, but the sales numbers are like massive. Like I wouldn't be surprised if it's something like 10 million copies already sold. I think it's something around that number. And it hasn't been around for that long. And it's already topping like active player counts on Steam. So this game is huge right now, which I mean, I can attest to because I've been playing the heck out of it.
Yeah, it's been great fun. I've been enjoying it.
Which I believe, Brian, you're the only one of us who has not played it.
I have not played, no.
Just to kind of like fill some people, some viewers in on what we're talking about, though. After Elden Ring came out, there was a lot of praise, but there was also some criticism that was being thrown around in that Elden Ring is not necessarily a game that appeals to everyone. Every time a FromSoft game comes out, there's always the discussion that gets kickstarted of should it have an easy mode or not? You know, like that was a big discussion with when Sekiro Shadows Die Twice came out, which was it's a really difficult game and people want to experience the story and they want an easy mode so that they can go through it without having to worry about like the immense difficulty that these games have to offer. Which is a whole different discussion in and of itself, but that's not what we wanted to talk about. What I wanted to talk about is a different criticism that has been getting thrown around, and it's actually a bit of an interesting one. Not long after Elden Ring came out, there were some video game developers who actually took to Twitter, and they voiced their thoughts on Elden Ring. It did raise an interesting conversation. So I'll go ahead and read the tweets here. I think the first one is from a Ubisoft developer. He says, quote, "The fact that Elden Ring scored a 97 Metacritic score is proof that reviewers don't give a flaming poop about game UX. My life is a lie." And then another video game developer followed up that tweet saying, "Nor PC graphics, stability, and performance, apparently." And then finally, I believe this is a developer who worked on Horizon Forbidden West, who followed up and said, "Nor quest design, really."
That's a lot to unpackage right in there.
Yeah.
It really is. It
but
really is.
Honestly, if I had to say something really, really big that's important to consider here, I feel like a lot of those are Western and European developers.
Yeah. And Elden Ring is an Eastern developed game. It was developed in Japan.
Right. Which that right there, just even looking at cultural differences of how they tell stories and things like that is going to drastically influence this discussion.
Right. So it was a string of tweets that started a very, very large debate over this game. And one thing I wanted to share that's actually kind of funny, somebody saw those tweets and photoshopped together what Elden Ring should look like in the opinions of these game developers.
Yeah, and the graphic that you showed us, I can see it because whenever I played Phoenix Immortals Rising, that's kind of what it was like.
Yep. Because Phoenix Immortals Rising, it follows pretty much the same kind of open world game formula that we've been seeing from developers for over a decade now. Like the formula for the open world game has kind of stagnated in a lot of ways from a lot of these big AAA studios, to where when there's an open world coming out like Far Cry or Immortals Phoenix Rising or Horizon, you kind of already know what's coming before you even play it.
Right. And maybe that's why people have latched on to Elden Ring so much, is because it is a breath of fresh air, because it's so different.
Yep. And it's interesting because I feel like Elden Ring, it definitely took a lot of hints from Breath of the Wild, because Breath of the Wild, it was like the open world game that kind of went off the beaten path and did something extremely different that is not very much in line with the traditional open world game. Though it did still have its hands a little bit in that old open world formula that was, let's be honest here, mostly started and standardized by Ubisoft.
I feel like we're coming into a new era of gaming where if you look at, you mentioned Breath of the Wild, you look at Zelda Breath of the Wild, and then another game I'm going to bring up is actually Pokemon Legends Arceus.
Mm-hmm.
And both of these games have something in common. They take the formula that has been established by the games prior to them within their specific franchise, and they broke those formulas.
Yep. It turned the formula on its head.
Exactly. Formulas are meant to be broken in time. Otherwise, a game will get stale. And I'm looking at this again. I'm not familiar with the Souls franchise, but I'm looking at this image that you posted, and I'm like, there's way too much here. How can you simply enjoy the game with all this crap on the screen?
Yeah, and that's not
really
what it actually
what you
looked
want
like.
in a
That's
game?
the meme. I just wanted to clarify that.
No, I get that. I do
Okay.
get that is the meme, and I fully understand the meme because this is what people are wanting, or this is what developers are wanting.
Yep.
Now, I'm going to ask you this question here, again from an outsider. If Elden Ring was released as brand new game from an unknown developer, it's the first of its franchise, would it be as popular?
It's hard to say because Elden Ring is such a product of games that have released in the past, because Elden Ring is a culmination of all of the best things about FromSoft's previous games. It draws from Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3. It draws from Bloodborne. It draws from Sekiro. It draws from Demon Souls. It's basically the culmination of everything that FromSoft has learned, all packed into one big game.
Right. But to address this question more specifically, because I remember whenever the first Demon's Souls game came out, and it had a strong cult following, and it was kind of this is weird, this is completely different, this is completely out of nowhere. I hadn't seen any advertising or marketing, but because people gave it a shot and they were like, oh, I actually kind of like this, it gave it that opportunity to grow. So honestly, I would say it probably wouldn't have had the rampant acceptance that it has, because it is a bit of a more well-known franchise now, but I think people would have actually eventually gravitated towards it just because I feel it stands that strong on its own.
Yep, it's very different from other open world games, because open world games, as I said before, I've kind of like the formula has gotten stagnant, so much so that people are begging for something fresh.
And that's the thing that I think really stands out here, is that it stands out. It's different. It is something unique that is contrasting with everything else. So if it's like in film design, where we use juxtaposition and contrast to get you to pay attention to things. So let's say the entire scene is lit in like a blue light, but then we have one object in frame that's red.
Mm-hmm.
That's what Elden Ring is. It's the red object. It's the one that is different from everything else, and it stands out like a sore thumb.
Yep, and that's why people find it interesting, is that it does things so drastically differently from how especially a lot of Western developers have kind of become accustomed to over the years.
Mm-hmm. Now, I would like to go ahead and jump into some of the more specifics that you've talked about, because one of the first things that you led off with was talking about how this doesn't appeal to everyone.
Yeah.
Why does it need to?
And that's exactly the conversation that has been brought up, is that I think the problem that these Western developers have, and the reason why they're expressing these criticisms, is because of the fact that, not everyone is going to be able to enjoy Elden Ring. And, there's so many people, I've heard, not video game developers specifically, but I've seen people say things like, how are people who just want to experience a game's story, they're not looking for like extreme difficulty. They're not looking for like these extremely different experiences. They just want something that is like fun and easy to get through. How are they going to be able to experience this? And my answer to that is, why do they have to? It's not that I'm trying, like, it's not really gatekeeping to say that. It's more just a game can be allowed to be something else that is not an experience that other people will enjoy. And it can still be an experience that other people can enjoy.
Well, that's the beauty of gaming. There is no one game that is meant for everybody. Everybody's needs are different. Everyone's desires are different. Going back to Zelda, there are two distinct styles of Zelda games. There are dungeon crawlers and there are overworld adventures. And there are some people like me who prefer an overworld adventure, who loves games like the original and Breath of the Wild, where you're just going out there to see what you can find. Then there are other people like my wife who prefer a more dungeon crawly experience like Twilight Princess. But Zelda understands this. They're not trying to make one game that all Zelda fans will enjoy. They take turns so that everybody gets their fill. And I think that people need to kind of realize just because this specific Souls game isn't for you doesn't mean it's not for others.
Yep, exactly. And I think what it really boils down to is that the reason why people are upset that they like the game isn't meant for their taste and therefore they can't enjoy it, and then they criticize it for not being that. I think it just boils down to people they hear the craze and they want to be part of it.
FOMO.
You know what I mean? Exactly. FOMO.
Fear of missing out.
People don't want to miss out on something that's really popular right now. So when they see so many people enjoying something, but they themselves can't enjoy it, that's when they start saying things like what these developers are saying.
Actually, since y'all mentioned that, are y'all familiar with the book publishing prank that was pulled a long time ago?
You have to be more specific.
You're going to have to be more specific, yeah.
There was I can't remember the name of the book, but essentially a radio talk show host that did like a night program. So he had a very like select group of listeners. He wanted to pull a prank based off of that concept of FOMO, to people that fear missing out, and he wanted to catch people red-handed that they lied about something. So what he did is he started to get his listeners in on a gag to where they would all go to like bookstores and publishing areas and things like that and start requesting a book that did not exist. And so as time went on, publishers started saying like, hey, where's this book? People want this book. Why can't we get this book? And it took like a long period of time to where now people are starting to say, oh, yeah, I've read it. I remember this book. Oh, I like what they did with this book. And it was all intentionally set up with that concept of catching people who want to be a part of something, even if it doesn't exist. And I'm not calling like the developers this, but it's that concept of some people want to get on the bandwagon so badly to be a part of something that they are willing to accept falsities as fact. And when that happens, people will sometimes latch onto these falsities and accept them as truth when they are not, because they might not know better, because they might be getting this secondhand information. And this is one of my big problems with the internet, is the falsification and verification of information, because you don't know where the sources are coming from sometimes.
Yeah. And it's so true. People just want to be a part of the current big thing. And right now, Elden Ring is the current big thing that's going on in gaming right now, and people who don't enjoy this kind of game are looking at this hype and they're like, I want to be a part of the hype.
And because you can interpret this in two different ways, and maybe this is me being a little bit maniacal, but it could either be that they are jealous of the success, or they want to be a part of it and they want to get on the bandwagon, but they don't fully understand it. But I feel like sometimes especially whenever you're reading like social media, it can come off as the first when it's trying to be the second. They just didn't word it the best way, especially
Right.
whenever you have a character limit. But the way that I'm interpreting it is they genuinely don't understand why this is appealing to that many people when it is something that's very different.
You can actually tell that from the way one of them worded it. The way they worded it is that, the fact that it scored a 97 on Metacritic is proof that viewers don't give a flaming poop about game UX. That tells me that he doesn't understand why people like this game.
Mm-hmm.
He's having a hard time trying to come to grip with like this UX is not the way that most UX designers are supposed to design a good UX. Why do people like this game?
Yeah. And I think I can make a good analysis for this. So bear with me for a second. So are y'all familiar with the 3 types of video?
Again, you'll have to be more specific.
No. Okay. So I'll start from the base then. In video production, we typically have 3 different types of videos that we would categorize, visual media. We have narrative fiction, which would be theater productions, stories, the traditional mainstream media. That is narrative fiction. A lot of commercial is also narrative fiction because you're promoting products and other things like that, but you're creating a fake scenario for that to happen. Then we have documentary, which is factual video. So things to more spread information. I think game developers are currently looking at the lens of these 2 without considering the third, which is avant-garde or experimental video, if you want to think of it that way. Elden Ring is an experimental video game franchise because they are going with completely different ideas and concepts than what mainstream quote unquote game developers would do. It's an avant-garde video game.
That actually makes a lot of sense. And that it completely explains why developers are having a hard time understanding why this kind of game can actually work.
Yep.
And it also explains why there is such an uproar among those who are upset about it. Because let's again compare this with Pokemon. You could easily say the same about Pokemon Legends Arceus. It is a very avant-garde Pokemon game. It changes a lot of things. But Game Freak decided to do this experimental game on an offshoot game, not one of their mainline titles, so that the hardcore fans who will not appreciate the changes will be like, oh, well, it's okay. It's just a side story.
It's almost like they have a raft and this game was like on an inner tube on a very thin rope. And if it didn't do well, they would just cut it off and let it drift out the sea, never to be seen again.
Exactly.
Yep. Whereas Elden Ring is different, where FromSoft kind of bet everything on it.
Yeah, it's been the most anticipated game for how many years?
For a few years. Ever since it was first teased, like something like 3 years ago.
Yeah. It's Kingdom Hearts 3 all over again, where it was so anticipated that when the final result came out, when it didn't live up to some people's expectations, it just fell flat.
Yeah, whereas it did live up to a lot of other people's expectations
True.
in a lot of ways. So, which I mean, I'm personally not a fan of Kingdom Hearts 3, but I can understand why people enjoy it.
Looking at you, Frozen World.
Oh.
But that's a different
Kingdom Hearts
discussion.
3 was a bad example, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah,
Right.
I get what you're saying.
It's the hype factor that people build up their own expectations, and then it's almost like Duke Nukem, where it's going to be impossible to live up to the hype, and then everybody's just sad.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, like that. Yeah, like probably the ultimate example of that is Half-Life 3. Like Valve themselves have stated that probably the reason they're never going to make Half-Life 3 is because how could they possibly live up to the expectations of that game at this point?
Right. But then they made the VR thing, so that was kind of cool, but it wasn't officially Half-Life 3. But actually, since we're talking about it, have y'all heard of the burner theory?
I have not. You'll have to enlighten me.
So this is a business concept that I heard about from one of the clients I worked with. If you have something that does, or like you have a bunch of people anticipating something. So we'll use like Duke Nukem as a reference. So if you have something that is so popular, that people are chomping at the bit for it. However, you know you are never going to be able to live up to the expectations of what people want. The way to stymie their expectations is to release a burner, meaning something that is going to allow them to get that franchise out there. People are going to dislike it intentionally, but then the next one that you release is going to overshoot their expectations because now they've been bottomed out.
Interesting.
And that's the burner theory, is that sometimes you intentionally release something bad, so then the next thing looks better by contrast.
So what you're trying to tell me was the Wii U was a burner.
Pretty much, if you want to think of it that way.
I don't know. I'm pretty sure that wasn't intentional, but I mean, to a degree, maybe.
Right. But I mean, it ended up having that effect. It's where it's almost like it leapfrogs a generation. But
Yeah.
I don't know necessarily where that would apply, but it's an interesting like philosophy of sometimes you have to stymie people's expectations so that they can actually be realistic.
Yeah. Well, no, I get it. It's like with music, because I'm a musician. I relate to a lot of things with music. You can't create a musical piece that just goes up, 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 and up. It has to have hills and valleys.
Mhm.
And to bring an audience back in order to push them forward, I can understand that.
Yep. By kind of bringing that expectation down
Mhm.
so that you can then bring it back up.
But I'd never heard of it put that way. That's interesting.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
That
really
is very interesting.
Yeah, I heard that from a client, and I was just like, "That's fascinating." Like, I literally spent like a week thinking on it, just like, where has that been used before? Was it intentional? Was it not intentional? What?
Oh no, I'm gonna be like the next week in my mind doing the same thing. I'm gonna lose sleep over this. I guarantee you guys.
Yeah,
I am going to
Me
lose
too.
sleep
I'm going to be
over
thinking
this.
about like what games, what movies have been put out that like were intentionally let down, that were immediately followed up by something awesome.
Maybe this is why. Okay, in a trilogy, the second movie is usually the letdown.
There you go. The burner theory.
Oh man. Oh man.
Temple of Doom was underwhelming by intention.
Well, I actually have a question for Addison here.
What's
Because
that?
we talked about some of the, and I'm using air quotes here, issues of Elden Ring, or rather the issues that a lot of game developers and some players have. But it appears to be that they're missing the point of why Elden Ring is so popular. So I'm going to ask you, as I know you are a huge fan of Elden Ring, you are loving the game. Why is it so good?
The reason it's so good is because it's just a game where you can just start playing it and just go. Elden Ring is basically Dark Souls meets Breath of the Wild. And what I mean by that is it's obviously a Dark Souls game, but the Breath of the Wild factor comes in the fact that it is a huge, huge, epic world that you can just go and explore and just discover things at your own wit. My favorite thing to do in Elden Ring is to just get on my horse, go wandering around, and just see what I find. And like, I'll just see something interesting in the distance, and I'll just be like, what's that? And I'll just go check it out. And then it's just like, oh, this seems cool. And all of a sudden there's like this big colossal thing that starts attacking me. I'm like, oh, I'm fighting a big boss now. This is awesome. And you then become determined to beat this boss because it's like you discovered this massive monster that's attacking you now. And so now you're just like, you want to overcome this new challenge that you've discovered. And when you're done beating your head against that wall and you finally overcome that challenge, you get a reward for it, whether it be a new spell, an incantation, or a piece of armor or a weapon or something, or like a unique item.
Overcoming the unexpected is rewarded.
Yes, that's what it is. It's like it's the fact that you can just discover things at your own leisure. The game's not trying to push you to do anything. You just do what you want in this huge world, and then you just discover these awesome things on your own. And then in those discoveries, you find new challenges that you can overcome, and you will always be well rewarded for your accomplishments.
The things that a lot of these critics are saying is the UI is faulty because it's giving you no information. It's not telling you where you should be going. It's not giving you a list of tasks that you're supposed to be doing so that you know what you're supposed to be doing. But the whole beauty of the game is you don't need that. It's all about just exploring. And
right.
So the user interface is important, and those little things are important to game design. User experience or player experience is the most important thing of all.
Right. Yeah. And kind of like what they did with like Sekiro, to where it was a lot more cinematic. The default settings of Elden Ring turn off the entire UI when you're not in combat. You're getting a full frame view of the world, the environment, what's on the horizon. This game has a really ridiculous like render distance. Like, I know that was one of the problems I had with Pokemon Legends Arceus, is things would pop in and out of existence in the distance, or you would start to see the low resolution models in the distance. Their animations look kind of chunky because the Switch couldn't handle that. But since this is on the PC and the more powerful consoles, you're able to actually get that experience of, oh, I'm in a huge, expansive world and I can see things way off in the distance. Like, one of the most influential moments of whenever I was playing the game was actually Addison was the troll that led me to this. Is I was running around in a swamp and just all the way at like the edge of the distance of the world, I'd see this big black orb just come hurtling in my direction, and I'm like, what is that? And it turns out it was a dragon and it tried to kill me. But it's moments like that it delivers on time and time again. You might be walking through the woods and you see this big brown thing in the trees and you're just like, what's that? I want to go see it. And it's a giant bear that wants to maul your face off.
I led you to that too.
Right. But the thing that I think that is interesting about it is sometimes though it isn't always hostile, because there was a point where like I saw a giant reading a book sitting on the cliffside and I was just like, what the hell? What's this? And then he's like, oh, hey, what's up? And I talked with them, and it's just like, I feel like it's those subtle encounters though that make the game like so much more impactful, because some of the characters stand out because they're so different.
Yeah, and I think this is where I think that, like, you know, something like a quest tracker would kind of ruin the experience for me, because like just to give an example of like the kind of experience you can have in this game is I remember going into into the woods in one part of the game I was exploring. I found a ruin, and in the ruin was like a sleeping bear, like one of those huge bears that Jared here knows about. In around the same area, I was hearing an odd kind of howling noise. Like, it wasn't like a standard wolf enemy that you would run into. Like, it sounded like just a regular person howling. And I was wondering what it was. I was looking around, but I couldn't find it. I couldn't figure out like what it was that I was hearing. So I just kind of moved on, fought the bear, got the reward that he was guarding, and then moved on. Well, I eventually came across a merchant who I mentioned the howling to, and he apparently knew about it. And he's just like, oh yeah, you heard the howling. Next time you're in that area where you heard the howling, use this gesture and like snap your fingers. And you should meet the person who's howling. I'm sure you guys will get along just fine. So then you go back and you snap your fingers, and then there's this like just big wolf man who just jumps down and lands in front of you. And he's just like, hey, I'm looking for a man. I want to kill him. Can you help me kill him? And I'm just like, sure. And he does all he does is kind of give you a vague description of like where this person ran off to. He just kind of points you in a direction, and it's up to you to kind of go the direction that he points you to, kind of figure things out for yourself, fill in the blanks. And then you eventually figure out that that the man he's looking for is a boss in this specific arena. And if you beat him, you'll find the Wolfman kind of standing outside the arena, and he thanks you for your help and gives you a reward.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I feel like a quest tracker would kind of like ruin an experience like that, because it's kind of like that was a quest that I kind of discovered on my own.
Yeah.
I kind of put the pieces together myself.
It's realistic to what would happen if this was real, because if you had encountered this in real life, you would have heard that. You would have been like, what is that? And you probably would have mentioned it to the next person you talk to, like, hey, do you know about this? That's kind of weird. That word of mouth kind of thing spreading about it. But at that point now, he had to point you in the direction. That's what they would do in real life, because we don't have quest markers in real life.
Yep.
Well, I feel like this is the kind of experience that game makers were wanting to do decades ago. Back with the first consoles, with the first games, but there were limitations. They couldn't do this. And so these things like a linear progression or a quest system, these things that are put in place were put there because of limitations, because we do not have the hardware capabilities to create an open world and let you go explore and put enough interesting things in there to allow you to do it yourself. And so they have to kind of guide your way or put you on a linear track to make the game interesting. But now that we are finally in an era where we have the technology to make these amazing experiences where you can just go out and experience things on your own, we are so ingrained to have these quest systems that it feels like something's missing without it.
And I think a lot of it too also has to do with like a lot of people who play video games now, they just want to follow a storyline. They just want to be like they just want to like, you know where they got to go to continue the storyline so that they can experience the story.
I had somebody put it a brilliant way. Oh, what was it? They wanted to walk in a movie.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what it is. They want to walk in a movie. And I want to make it clear, like, those kinds of games can exist. Like I'm not criticizing like other games for having things like quest markers and quest trackers and stuff like that. I mean, I some of my favorite games of all time have those exact things. But Elden Ring is an example of a game that can exist that does things differently than those other games.
Yep.
It's just it's not necessarily like killing off the idea of having like a more linear tracker system, like you would see in something like Final Fantasy 14 or Xenoblade Chronicles
or Far Cry.
Yeah, and it's not a bad system. I'm not saying it is a bad system.
Yeah, it's not a bad system, and it certainly has its place. Obviously, it's more like there's room for games like Elden Ring too, where like there isn't just a direct thing telling you what to do and where to go, but rather letting the player figure things out for yourself.
That's what made my experience in Breath of the Wild so amazing. Because when I was streaming Breath of the Wild, I had completed all 4 divine beasts, and I was getting close into the game, and someone pointed out, why haven't you gone to get your tunic yet? And I was like, you mean the blue one? I don't know. I've been waiting for it because it looks cool. I've seen it everywhere, and I haven't been able to find it. And they're like, well, you're supposed to go get it after the first divine beast. And I was like, how was I supposed to know? Well, it shows up in your quest markers. And that's when I learned I've had quest markers turned off for the entire game. But I'm glad I did, because I legitimately had to seek out each divine beast by myself without a little icon showing me where it was. And it made the game amazing for me. And I tell everybody, turn it off before you start, because it's so much more fun without those little pings telling you where to go.
Yeah, it ruins the sense of adventure for me, because I don't have the opportunity to explore. Because whenever I play a video game, I love the idea of I'm going into uncharted territory. I know in Japanese culture, isekais, animes, it's, I think it literally translates into like another world. It's where one character is now getting brought to a different reality, essentially. And I feel like that's what they want to do for the player, because you take on the role of this character that, is part of, the Elden Ring universe. But that character is an extension of yourself, kind of like how Link is very androgynous and doesn't speak. It's so you can relate to them and put your own emotions and feelings into the character. And I think that's what they're going for with Elden Ring, is they want you to put yourself in the shoes of your character that you control and experience the world as if it was, this is your new reality.
Exactly. This is your new reality, and you need to live it, and you need to live it however you wish to live it.
There is actually one other concept that I wanted to touch on real quick. It's actually like the genre of Elden Ring. And I think that influences the design a lot. If you had to categorize like what type of video game this was as if it was like a film genre tag, what would you give it?
I would probably call it an action adventure game, or an open world game.
Mm-hmm.
So along those lines. I know that when Nintendo put out Breath of the Wild, they actually kind of coined their own term for the kind of game that Breath of the Wild is. They said we don't like to call it an open world game. They prefer to call it an open air game, which sounds weird,
I can
but
understand that.
Yeah, it sounds weird at first, but then when you think about it, it's just like, you know what, that actually does kind of make sense, because open world signifies that it's just another like Ubisoft-esque formulaic open world game, whereas open air.
You spend a lot of time gliding.
I was gonna say it implies a sense of freedom, like you taking
Right.
in the air
Yeah.
of the world, and you go to explore all the wonders of it.
Based off of what you've heard, Ryan, what would you go with for a game like this?
I was thinking along the action adventure film.
Action adventure?
Yeah.
So that's where I differ from y'all, because if I had to categorize this, I would call it post-apocalyptic fantasy.
Yeah, I mean, Breath of the Wild is the same thing. Yeah.
Right. But with Elden Ring, it's, ancient civilizations are, they're all messed up. They're falling apart. You're in the remnants of a world. There's all sorts of things that have happened, and you have to kind of explore and figure out, like, what happened to all these people or areas and regions, and, why are they like this? But it does it in a very lore, esoteric, soft kind of way. It doesn't like spoon feed you lore like this is what happened to our people.
Yep.
There's no crotchety old man that's going to give you everything, of like, this is the ancient histories of our people and all that. You have to figure it out on your own.
These games have always done that with things like, hiding lore and things like item descriptions and obscure dialogue.
Right. But the way I was going to tie this into the game design talk is, for something that's post-apocalyptic fantasy, there isn't a lot of stuff there. Nature is taken over. There's ruins scattered about. There's, ancient primordial evil creatures about, dragons and whatnot, and, illusions and all that kind of stuff. So it definitely fits that, fantasy and post-apocalyptic kind of symbiosis. But I think that boiled over into the design of like the user interface, because in that kind of environment, it would make sense to have a very minimalist UI. Which minimalism is a very popular design style in Japanese culture.
Less is more.
Yeah, and
Yep.
I feel that kind of flowing into our culture. Minimalism is a huge trend right now, and actually something that I've been kind of taking on myself, where, like you said, less is more. When you cut back, when you start to peel away things, it opens up your world to be able to take in more.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
It's our current day hippie movement.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I totally see what you're saying about like the post-apocalypse kind of fantasy that they're going for here, because it having that minimalist identity, because it's like a post-apocalypse kind of world, just kind of goes to show that, from a lore standpoint, it does kind of make sense that there's not really a whole lot that your character has access to in their adventure.
Yep. Especially if you start as a wretch? I mean, you literally just have a loincloth and a club.
Yep. Which that's how you started. You started as a wretch.
Yep.
So
I wanted to start. I wanted to be the Solid Snake or Liquid Snake from Metal Gear Solid 3. I'm dropping in naked, and I'm gonna find everything on location.
And how has that worked for you so far?
I can slap dragons. Uh, so quite well, but the beginning was a bit rough. Although I will not lie, it is very satisfying using some of the weapon arts to just you have this really big weapon, but then you just replace the weapon art with literally a move just called kick, and you just kick things to death or kick things off cliffs. It has become my favorite pastime. Just lure something to a cliff and just kick. I've essentially just been reenacting Sparta or 300.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, where he kicks the one dude into the pit.
Very satisfying.
So do you think that Elden Ring is going to create a shift in the gaming industry as far as these things that are clearly different? Do you think it's
I think
going to cause a shift, not necessarily in the gaming industry, but in particular with open world games?
I think that what Elden Ring is doing is it's kind of like I feel like this trend was actually started by Breath of the Wild, where Breath of the Wild was the game that kind of flipped the open world concept on its head. It still had its hands in some of the traditional formulas, little things like, you find a tower and the tower opens up a whole section of the map for you, things like that. But overall, it's still kind of started to flip the concept on its head to where I think a lot of people in the industry were starting to pay attention of like, ooh, this actually seems like it actually kind of works. And I think what happened here is that FromSoft kind of was also taking notes with what that game did. And they decided, you know what? We want to make a game that's a culmination of everything that we've done with the Soulsborne series. Let's see if we could do something like this. And Elden Ring just kind of took it to the next level.
And that's why I think they didn't continue the actual like Dark Souls franchise, because Dark Souls itself is very, I don't want to say linear, but the progression is more railroaded than Elden Ring, where Elden Ring, you pretty much have access to like everything at the beginning, just about. There's very few actual like true gatekeepers in the game. Whereas in Dark Souls, you pretty much had to clear things in a particular order just because of the natural like strength progression of your character. So I feel like this is the first of the like Souls games that is truly open world. And I think that's where we're getting into the point to where I think this is the bigger thing influencing it. Breath of the Wild was definitely the proof of concept that put the idea in people's heads. But I feel like we are at the point technologically that allows developers like From Software to actually execute on their ideas to the fullest extent.
That's what I think happened. Like Breath of the Wild was the catalyst, and Elden Ring is just taking that idea to the next level.
Because Elden Ring is like it's the game with like the highest like specs for like minimum requirements to play it, right?
Yeah, I was honestly very shocked by the minimum requirements to play it on PC. Like for like minimum requirements, like those, they were steep. Like a minimum of a GTX 1060 just to run the game, like that's steep.
But you can see why it's required now.
Yeah,
right. And I think that is something that is stymieing the progress of the video game industry. I know that they have the E rating. E is for everyone. E is also the meme for EA. But in terms of video games, it doesn't have to appeal or be accessible to everyone. As long as your target demographic is the one that you're hitting and you can make a profit off of it, then you can make a video game.
Exactly. Yeah. And and there's nothing wrong with being somebody who just wants to play a game for like a good story. If you just want a good story and the gameplay's kind of a means to an end for you, I mean, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. That's fine. Everybody has their different ways of playing games. If story is the main thing you care about, that's fine. And to be fair, Elden Ring, the story, it's good and the lore is good, but the base story itself isn't really anything like super original. It's a very chosen one-esque kind of story.
Oh yeah, it's pretty similar to kind of like a hero's journey.
Yep, exactly. It's just kind of like, you are the chosen one. Go find the Elden Ring and beat a bunch of bad guys to find it. It's like, that's pretty much the story. Like, there's not like, it goes deeper than that.
It's a hero's journey combined with an underdog trait.
Right. So, I mean, it's not like the most complex story in the world. Like the game mostly thrives on its world, its lore that you discover along your journey. The bosses are just an absolute joy to fight. That's where the game really shines. Elden Ring is just not a game that's built just for experiencing a story, but there's other games out there for that.
I feel like if you're going to have that big open world and you're going to allow your characters to explore at their own rate and in their own way and in the order that they choose, you have to pull the story back and make it as simple as possible. Because a story has very set points that happen in a certain order.
Right. And having triggers like that in a video game kind of forces your hand. I know I was talking with one of my friends who is a game developer, and he was talking about how he hates doors.
I remember you telling me about that, how like programmers hate doors.
Yeah, it's because like a door is a trigger, and it's like, okay, is it a loading zone? What's on the other side? Can they see through it? Anytime that there's something interactable like that could be used in a variety of different ways, now they have to consider all of the different ways that it's going to have to interact with the rest of the game. And whenever you start adding more and more and more doors or transitions or loading zones and stuff like that, it gets very complicated very quickly. But I feel like what you were saying, where you have to strip back the story, I think that's why they have these non-centralized kind of quests just kind of strewn about, because you could do all of them or you could do absolutely none of them. But in terms of the way that you interact with the world, it's not going to influence the overall thing. But I think the thing that I think stands out more, I think I'm saying it a lot. I'm turning into the little engine that could.
Yep.
But the concept here is that each of those quests that you complete influences your experience on the world. Instead of like how in Skyrim, one of my biggest gripes was you help with like the civil war between the Stormcloaks and the Imperials.
Yeah.
And yet it didn't really feel like anything changed.
Yeah, nothing really, like, it doesn't really feel like your actions are that influential on that quest line.
Right. But for Elden Ring, even though your choices in completing these quests and stuff doesn't necessarily influence things on a world scale, you do see these characters thank you, give you rewards, or they may move to another area and then you bump into them again and you're just like, oh, hey, what's up?
Nice to see you again.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that makes it more satisfying for me, is that whenever I do interact with them, I do see that element of change and influence on what happened in the world, at least from my perspective.
Well, side quests are not meant to alter the game world at all. That's why they're a side quest. They're meant to alter the player. And what you take away from that is a richer experience for what you did or did not do in that side quest. That's why games like this are so simple. Like stories that are in games like this are so simple. You fill in the complexities with the choices and decisions that you make along the way, and it makes it a personal journey.
Yep. And that's what it ultimately boils down to. Like rather than being told a story, you are creating your own story.
Yep. And I know this might sound a little like cliche or hokey, but honestly, I feel like this is the kind of game people were chomping at the bit for coming out of COVID.
Yes.
Yeah, I can kind of see that.
We've been cooped up. We want to go on an adventure. And this delivers that experience.
Yeah, it really does. It really does. So
it's like how Animal Crossing came out right at the perfect time in the middle of all this. Like, oh, we're going to be at home. We're going to be comfy. And,
Elden Ring. Yeah, where Animal Crossing came out at the time when, us like isolating ourselves was just starting. So we needed a way to interact with our friends and spend time with our friends. Elden Ring is coming out in a time where everyone's anxious to get out of their homes a lot more, and they want to go do stuff. And so now you have this game that allows you to just kind of go out and discover stuff
on a grand scale. And I think that's the big thing.
Yeah, it is on a very grand scale. Like, because I think, because like, it's honestly impressive how massive this game is. Because like, I remember when we were streaming it, I told you about like when you go to the next area of the map and you're just like, wait, there's other areas of the map. You're just like, I thought like this is like this map isn't the whole map. I'm just like, heck no, dude. You're just like on one tiny speck of it.
Yeah. It's a big map.
Yeah, because I think now you've seen how big the map actually is, and you're just like, oh.
No, I'm about like 25 hours in, and I've only explored the second like area.
Wow.
And I know I still haven't fully explored like the first zone. And like I think that's one of the things I love about the game, because I unintentionally bypassed the first story boss and I ended up killing the second story boss unintentionally first, and then I went back and killed the first one.
It's true.
Just because I was exploring, I was crawling around like every cave and ledge and finding, other areas that I could travel through. And then it was like, oh, there's a big castle. Well, I went in there and I was like, well, there's a lot of stuff I don't want to deal with just yet. So what's over here? And I ended up just going around the castle. There's this like little alcove thing that's easily overlooked, but you can actually fully bypass the castle if you want to.
Yep. And it's just, you combine that with just the unique things that you come across, like as you're exploring, like you were mentioning this earlier where like, the game has like these people who are just giant pots. And it's just like, wait, there's giant pot people?
Yep.
What, I want to know more about these guys. And then you have bosses, like one of the story bosses, like he has a first and second phase. In his first phase, he's just like a dude with a couple of axes with a bunch of arms like latched to him. And then when he goes into his second phase, he chops off one of his arms and then shoves it into like the head of a dragon, takes control of it. And now he has a dragon head arm that breathes fire. It's like, holy crap.
That's how you do a boss like phase transition.
Like just crazy stuff like that you just discover in this game. You're just like, I can't wait to see what else I see that's in this world.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I think is most bewildering about the game so far is like the UI is minimalist, but what actually happens in game is somehow always one-upping itself.
Elden Ring's a heck of an experience, man. But it is very, very different, and it's not going to appeal to everyone.
No, but it doesn't need to, and I think that's
exactly
the mentality that mainstream developers need to get out of their head, because that was one of the first things I learned whenever I worked in food service. Everybody has different tastes. Nobody's going to like the same burger. Nobody's going to like the same food. Same thing is going to happen with movies and video games, with visual media and content. Like I like comedy, whereas my wife likes things that are more dramatic or involved in the story. And so it's just, everybody's going to have different things that they gravitate towards.
Yep. And Elden Ring is just one of those things that's just, for a specific kind of audience. And that's okay. Yep.
Well, this has been an enlightening discussion for sure. We've kind of hopped around from topic to topic, but
we really did. But it's a really interesting like bunch of topics. The core of what I wanted to talk about was not what like the exact things that the developers said on Twitter. It was more the conversation that it kickstarted, the larger scope of like topics that this led into. And it really does go into a lot of interesting ideas of like different kinds of games that can exist alongside of each other. Just because you have established formulas that work for a lot of people doesn't mean you can't have also games like Elden Ring where things are drastically different.
People's design philosophies are going to change based off of your experience and what you understand video games to be.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. And formulas have to change over time and evolve in order to prevent themselves from getting stale. Unfortunately, we as human beings hate change. And so when we see formulas change, we immediately say, that's not a Souls game, or that's not a Zelda game, or that's not a Pokemon game. But we have to allow ourselves to accept change and go into these new experiences with an open mind, because you never know, you might actually enjoy the things that they have made for us.
Yep.
I have a poster that I'm going to be hanging up at my job. And it just has 3 words on it: innovate, not stagnate.
I like that.
That's good.
Very simple, very straightforward, but that's what you got to do, especially in an artistic industry like this, like video games, movies, any kind of visual communications kind of industry, motion graphics, all that stuff. It all applies to where you have to keep adding new spices to the mixture, or else it's going to end up falling flat eventually because people will get tired of it. That's why we don't eat the same meal every day.
Yeah, because I mean, you could it is possible to live off of one meal, but at what cost?
Too much of a good thing in excess.
Well, thanks guys for this wonderful discussion. This was really great, and thank you everybody for joining us today. If you'd like to keep up with what we're doing and learn more about ourselves and our podcast, you can find information on our website at insertgamepodcast.com, where you will also find links to our Twitter and YouTube channel. As for me, I'm going to go and I'm going to play something great. It may not be Elden Ring, but it'll be fabulous.
Oh man, let me tell you, man, if Breath of the Wild 2 does come out this year, it's gonna be really hard choosing what my game of the year is.
I am curious to see if that happens, because that's the one Game Awards I would be very I want to see what happens.
This year's Game Awards are gonna be very interesting.
I look forward to seeing what happens. But in the meantime, you guys take care.
Have a good one, everybody.
Later, gamers. I wanted to add a long, clean break for that, so you can cut that out.
No, it's staying.